welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for the 11th of March 2025. And we please be advised, everyone present, that this is a public meeting and is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Could I ask, have we any declarations of interest? There are none. Moving on to number 2, apologies for absence and substitutes.
Yes, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Clancy, Councillor Wymark and Councillor Lamming. And Councillor Lamming's substitute is Councillor Harvey. Thank
you. Welcome, James, and hope you enjoy this. I would say it's a thrilling agenda today, but it seems very procedural. But of course, that doesn't mean it won't be interesting. And we welcome your contributions. Let's move on to item 3, the minutes of Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting held on the 4th of February. Do we have any comments on those? Is everyone happy with them? I will take people's silence as acceptance that they are a fair reflection of that meeting. So we'll move on to Chairman's announcements. The only thing I have to report is that due to the workload of the officers, the annual report won't be ready for the next meeting. It will be ready for the meeting after. That was confirmed to me today. So just not through any laziness or sloppiness on anyone's part, but because we've got a change in the way work is being. Obviously, a lot of work is being done and covered for by people because of
LGR.
Yeah, and also because of Mike leaving, I guess, as well. That's created pressures across everywhere.
The other item,
yeah. So it will be then presented at the meeting following. So it's not hidden. It's just delayed. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5, public speaking. Do we have anybody who wants to speak?
There's no public speaking.
Okay, we move straight on then to the Cabinet reports and the strategic performance and risk report for quarter 3, 24-25. Lead officer Matt, thank you.
Good evening, Chair. For the performance aspect of the strategic risk and performance report for quarter 3, we have 19 measures at green, 4 at amber and 4 at red. The ones that are at red have work underway to manage them and to improve them. And for 2 of those, you should see some improvements reflected in the report, customer satisfaction and the number of working days taken to process new claims and change of circumstances for housing benefit and council tax benefit. And the other 2 remain challenges with work underway. For the risk aspect of the report, the main aspect there to highlight is small changes this quarter, which in part reflect the rejection of Cabinet last quarter to de-escalate some of those risks. So they remain on the risk register for this quarter. We have seen a small change in terms of the controls in place for our cybersecurity risk, which has brought the residual risk assessment for that down to 12 from 15.
Thank you very much. I'm sure some people have got some questions about perhaps some of the reds and ambers, but anything you would like to ask, please let me know. And anybody want to speak? Jonathan.
Right. I think it's obviously last quarter, the quarter 2, there was only 2 reds. Now we've obviously got the 4 reds, which is the 2 that we've still got. It's just a little bit concerning, obviously, that they are still sort of red, which is a bit of a concern. Working days lost due to sickness, I noticed that has come into the red. The 1,002 days, the highest impact being on the housing benefits. So I think there is a link there, if you know what I mean, that the working days to process the housing benefits is one of the reds, but then also the sickness days is now in the red, and that also links to the fact that that is a department that's been hit by that. So that's a little bit of a concern, and obviously we need to work on all those areas to sort of focus on, and I think there is a sort of like a link there. The ambers, obviously, for me, it's a little bit of a concern because the sort of like news from central government is all about building, but the percentage of planning decisions in everything is an amber now. The food businesses with 4 and 5 ratings, that's still amber. And I just feel that, you know, we've got to focus on these areas. Now, there are some positives, and obviously I've looked at some of the positives which that are working with the areas that I sort of shadow and everything like that. So obviously the number of affordable homes is good to see, because we do need more affordable homes and everything like that. The percentage of retail space in market towns as well, percentage of economic growth, really good stuff. So it is overall just a little bit concerning that we've got obviously the reds and ambers that, you know, we need to sort of focus on. And I guess if they have got the problems with the staff, then that should be addressed more so that we can see that chap turn the corner. One of my main concerns is the waste and the recycling, because waste collected is up and recycling is down, and that just concerns me a little bit that, you know, that's not how it should be. We should be focused on those situations, and I think it is, although they're still green, there is still a bit of a concern that we're seeing those figures sort of like that happen, and especially when so much emphasis was made on by the current administration on how they're more environmentally friendly, to then, which is what we said at the meeting, is the fact that if you're going to say, yeah, we're more economically friendly, put some targets on it. Now, one of the things we said is that if you're going to say, oh yeah, we're going to have a climate all this, climate all that, make it so that you put a big target on it, but the target's actually gone down, because the 2023-24 recycling rate was 53%. We've now declared a climate emergency and all this biodiversity emergency and all this we've done, but the target is slipping down to 50%. So instead of saying, now we've declared all that, we'll put the targets up, we've put the targets down, and that just seems to me counterintuitive. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll note those points for discussion with the officers accountable for those measures. Are there any specific questions you'd like us to address?
No, I just think there is the link between where you've got ones that sort of constantly in the red, and then we've seen that that's obviously one of the ones that's then now the new red that's coming in is to do with the sickness. You know, you're never gonna get on top of it if you got then sort of people off sick, and I just think that's what that needs to be addressed to sort of try and sort these out.
Caroline.
One of my concerns is customer satisfaction. We don't seem to be getting a handle on that. 36%, when our target is 65%. Why is that?
So, yeah, the customer satisfaction target and the performance against the target is in the red, so it's not on par with where we were targeted to be. I think the good news is, if you look at the direction of travel, is it has improved this quarter, acknowledging it is still off of the target. However, we do have significant investment in our customer experience programme, which has several projects that are targeted to increase customer experience. I think it's important to note that it isn't something that's going to increase overnight. It will be a journey that we're on to increase the customer satisfaction ratings. I guess an example of that is in the narrative in the report, where we have initiated our website phase 2 project. We have made some background changes related to the information architecture, which has increased our online customer satisfaction rating this quarter. So it's increased from 26% to the 35%, just under a 9% increase in making those smaller targeted changes. Appreciate it won't stop there. There's lots more work that we need to do, and that's where the investment that the authority has made in improving customer experience will begin to come to fruition.
Thank you, Karen. We do keep hearing this. And through experience with residents and my own parish, it's difficult to get hold of anyone when you try and ring up, to get hold of the right person and get the right information and not being given wrong information.
So I can obviously take specific examples away to look at. I think when we continue to look at our phone, when we continue to look at our phone abandonment rates, our abandonment rates continue to perform well. So phone performance and phone satisfaction, which we rate down our phone satisfaction channels, continue to be high performing. But like I said, I can take away any individual examples and talk them through.
Emma.
Sorry, it's still on customer satisfaction. I just wondered, is there any further drill down on the percentage of dissatisfied and the reasons why? So are they dissatisfied with the service? Are they dissatisfied because they didn't get the answer they wanted?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. So we don't separate dissatisfaction based on service requests that related to a policy result and where a customer may be dissatisfied because they didn't get the answer. However, there is a policy decision, which means that that customer has been is dissatisfied. We are looking at our approach to customer satisfaction. I also think it's worth noting that in terms of the overall demand, these satisfaction ratings reflect 0.23% of that overall demand that we serve across all of our customer base, so not even 1% of that demand. But within the narrative there, you can see that service areas receiving the highest level of dissatisfaction this quarter of waste, recycling and council tax, and that may be reflective of policy related to those decisions.
Thanks, Joe. While we're still on this subject, where you've got a customer satisfaction survey, is the take-up going higher than it was before, which might suggest that more and more people are taking up the opportunity to put in a customer satisfaction rating, and what are there sort of specific things that you've been managed to do as a result of listening to those particular complaints?
So we have made small changes to our customer satisfaction survey, particularly online, in the way in which we collect customer satisfaction. We have got some more change. You won't see them results in this Q2 results here. You will see the increase in responses coming through in future customer satisfaction reports. And we also are looking at incorporating new channels via tracking that customer satisfaction, so things such as footfall and wider service areas, because we recognise that the touch points in which we're collecting customer satisfaction at the moment is limited. So there is work to increase those response rates, and hopefully you'll start to see that come forward through the quarter reports in future.
Yeah, thanks, Corinne. I work with ops at work quite a lot, and I know how difficult it can be, especially as customers or residents can be they're a bit down at this time of year in general with the political climate, so thank you. I was just wondering, that score, how does it compare with, say, South Norfolk or other, comparatively, is it down across the whole market, if you like, or are we in a bad place individually? Thanks.
So some of this lends itself to, I guess, our way in which we track customer satisfaction is not so mature that we can compare across maybe a industry standard, but there's absolutely something we'll be looking at in terms of how can we benchmark. We have looked at some external information that has shown that there is a decline, but to what percentage it's sort of apples and pears, because we're not using industry standard rating. So we are seeing a decline in terms of market, but how that compares related to like for like is difficult for us to say at this point, because we don't use market comparative assessments.
Okay, I've got several people. I'll just let people know in order. I've got Tony, then Lacey, then Mark, then Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just refer you to measure number 3, which is the number of working days taken to process new claims, and so on and so forth, change of circumstances of housing benefits and so on. So the latest value is 41. I take it that's days, bearing in mind just the number of days being the narrative, and the target is 7. To your average person, that seems one hell of a mountain to climb. Can I just ask if what sort of effort is being made to reduce that number, or is that number exaggerated for any specific, idiosyncratic purposes that may or may not fall out of the system? Because that's the type, the 41 days is exactly the type of things that most people complain about. Council take too long to sort things out.
Yeah, on that one, Tony, you'll see the second chart on after the main page for that measure. It provides a little bit more of the picture of how that has increased over time to around that 40-day mark, and how it is decreasing again and anticipated to decrease over the months ahead. One of the key drivers for this significant increase beyond that target was a changeover of systems to manage those claims. And some extra measures have been introduced due to the complexity and some of the issues with that implementation to reduce the working days taken to process claims. You'll see in the grey box on that chart that there's a projection there where the team expect it to be within that 7 days within the next few months. Sorry, Jamie, did you want to talk to that one as well?
If that's okay, Chairman. I was just thinking there's never been a better time for Richard Dunsire to walk in the room, but I won't embarrass him by asking for the question to be repeated, and I'll actually test my own knowledge, and he can tell me if I've got it wrong. So everything Matt said is correct. The team have undertaken an absolutely gargantuan effort to correct this issue, and it has been a challenging year for the reasons Matt said. The system, to Councillor Emsall's question earlier, there's no relationship that I'm aware of between sickness and performance. It's been about experienced members of the team legitimately moving on in their careers and us leaving some less experienced members that have taken a bit of time to come up to speed, both with the new system and the infinitely complex world of benefits. The only point I'd add to Matt's synopsis is that projection, I can tell you, is not just a projection, it's a reality. So of course we're looking at Q3 data, but in real terms we're looking at operational data on a week-by-week basis, and we are absolutely now operating under our threshold of 7 days. It doesn't mean that the cumulative performance as it's shown for Q4 will look much better, but certainly from Q1 of next year we'll be back where we should be, which is operating under that threshold of 7 days. The only other thing I'd say, just to give a further bit of reassurance, is it's a relatively crude measure. There's a lot of different types of transactions within that team, and of course the team have taken every effort to focus on the most vulnerable clients and making sure that where we need to get money to people, that's been prioritised over kind of more transactional, less problematic work.
Thank you. Next on the list is Lacey.
Thank you. Back to customer satisfaction. Do we keep a log of the dropped phone calls where people give up or they didn't get through?
Yep, that's known as the abandoned calls.
And when you said you've got no telephony responses to the survey, how's the invitation sent? Is it an automated one, or is it after they've spoken to a member of the team?
Yeah, so it's a manual push through at the end of a call that the advisor has to put the customer through.
Next is Mark.
Mine was on a similar sort of notice. So I know it's an online customer satisfaction, but as it is only 1 in 500 customers that are actually giving you kind of a satisfaction feedback, have you actually got a way of capturing any of the other ones? Because do you record at the end of, say, a conversation when they've got through to someone and they say, is there anything else we can do for you? Are you satisfied with today's service? Does that then get recorded as a satisfied customer, or is that just lost into the ethers? Because that might then help kind of put your numbers in a more positive light rather than be on a whipping block all the time.
Yeah, so the online satisfaction is at the point in anyone is visiting the website and looking and browsing the website. The telephony satisfaction is at the end of a call where the advisor will ask the customer to hold the line while they pop them through to a customer satisfaction survey. Footfall is currently via a QR code. However, coming back to sort of the point I made earlier, is absolutely there are more touch points across the organisation and services that we have an opportunity to increase our response rates. And I know the Customer Insight Lead is working with the service areas to make sure we better capture them opportunities to broaden the customer satisfaction and where we're receiving that from across service areas.
It's just, I know 99% of people on a phone call, if you say, can you just fill out a questionnaire at the end by touching your thing, we'll just hang up because they're done. They've got what they need and they're moving on with the day. If you could just say, are you satisfied with today's service? And they give you a positive or a negative feedback, and you could record that, I think you would get a much better metric on where you're actually at with customer satisfaction, and it might give you a nicer time sitting here.
Peter.
Thank you, Joe. Reading the report, I had certain expectations of this evening, and I have to say as yet, they've not been satisfied. If I look at this report overall, I see 4 red warnings, and I see 16 areas which are in decline. And yet, in your introduction, that was not addressed. So I would really like to know what we're doing in detail about those that are in decline, because in a sense, those in decline are actually more worrying than those who are in red. Because if they're in red, they're getting lots of attention, presumably to rectify. But if an area is in decline, that says to me it's certainly going in the wrong direction, and that should flash all sorts of warning signs which don't seem to be represented in the report, and I haven't heard anything this evening as yet to assuage my fears.
So on that aspect of measures in decline, one reason why we aren't particularly emphasising that is it's a relatively basic measure, a 2-point comparison of the performance this period compared to the last period it's been compared against. And so it doesn't give us a great sense of how that is changing over the long run over time. We're doing some work over the next few months to improve that approach to how we're reporting the performance as well. But at this stage, I would suggest that looking at them in a single snapshot is not necessarily all that helpful, and it's the what you see in terms of changes to amber potentially at this stage, or those measures that you see with an indication of decline over multiple periods, which would warrant some more attention.
If that's the case, well, why are those areas in decline not amber? They should at least be highlighted as an area of concern, should they not? I mean, it seemed obvious and relevant to me.
So we take a 2-stage approach to communicating those measures that may not be performing as well. So the first is by that red, amber, green category, where we're comparing them directly to the target and whether they are meeting that or not. If they aren't meeting the target but they're above the set tolerance, then they are coded as amber. And if they're below the tolerance or worse than the tolerance, then they are coded as red. The direction of travel is separate from that. As I mentioned before, is somewhat more of a more basic indication of how that measure is performing. Yeah, so an example that may be useful here around that one is we have the staff turnover measure 30 as amber. That one is just on the cusp of being amber and of showing no change. It's only very slightly different from the last period by less than 0.01%. And so it indicates there's no change. However, that doesn't necessarily give us a picture over the long run of that. So I think if you're looking for the trajectory and the trend over time, at this stage, I'd encourage you to look at the charts and how that's performing. We're providing that indication of how the performance it compares to last year as well, and that should give a sense, not so much in a categorised coded way, but when you look at those measures in more detail about how that performance is improving or deteriorating.
So of that 16, what percentage would you say we should be concerned about?
So based on where we are, so this is Q3 performance report, you've got Q4 left to go, and based on where majority of those declines are sitting against a green target, so let's take the number of affordable homes delivered, where we have the latest value of 205 with a target of 75, but a declining view, you can see that that target has overachieved exceptionally in its value that you're seeing in your performance report this quarter. So I would say the focus on your reds and ambers is where we should be focusing the attention at this point. Thank you.
So I just put my hand up to speak and then realise it's up to me. I think I'm back at school. I think there's a point in what Peter is making. I think that, for example, when we're comparing attendance data at my school, we will compare autumn term to autumn term. We will not compare autumn term to summer term. Attendance data will be much worse in the autumn term because it includes the run up to Christmas when children are getting ill. The summer term includes the summer months where children are more likely to be well in terms of their overall health. And the same goes for staff absenteeism. So what we've got here is that we're measuring quarter to previous quarter. And I know you've got some charts which compare to previous years, but I'm thinking, for example, I looked at the household waste and recycling and the data which Jonathan mentioned. But actually, for example, it says the total dry rate of waste increased by 1.5%, which obviously is your rubbish you're throwing out in your recycling bins, which was an increase, which was a good increase compared to typically over Christmas, 30% more waste is generated, of which a lot more is disposable, as in people just throw it in the bin and don't really think about recycling. But as Jonathan said, it's shown as a decline because we compared it to autumn when recycling and rubbish is at a lower level, so people have more time, dare I say it, to sort and rest of it. So actually, we're comparing apples with pears, and I think it would be a lot better if the data was, yes, showing a comparison to the previous quarter, because a lot of things are going to be similar. Planning applications you would expect are typically going to be similar, those sorts of things, you know, housing allocations or whatever, those things be the same. But there are certain elements which I think are very much seasonal, and we get a much better picture. So, you know, I think actually Peter's hit on a point that we need some sort of clarity around those measures. And I know you talked about coming up with new measures, but is that something which is going to be brought in soon for those more, you know what I mean? So we're comparing season to season, quarter to quarter. Sorry.
Yes, so on the comparison, where possible, we are trying to make that a common sense comparison to the same time last year, if there's a seasonality to that measure. It is a balancing act in trying to get the definition of that measure right. In some cases, we will be comparing to the previous quarter because the accountable officer for that feels that that is a better comparison. In terms of making some more significant improvements to that, that is something that we are aiming to achieve through setting the measures for the next financial year. So you may not see that in the next quarter's report, but we'll be working through the process to set that up over the next quarter, ready for Q1 reporting.
Thank you. Has anybody else got anything else they'd like to ask? Can I just say I missed out on my bingo because Paul didn't say anything, and he would have been the only councillor that missed that. I could have gone bingo, and it would have had everybody. So missed it. Sorry, Paul, we missed that opportunity. Thank you very much. We obviously there are recommendations to endorse the performance for Q3 and to endorse the current position and respect to risk management and agree to the proposed controls. All those in favour of the recommendations as stated.
That's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and thanks for answering our questions. We are moving on to finance report for Q3 with Darren. Welcome, Darren.
Chair. So the report we've got before us is the Q3 finance report, which takes us to the end of December. Just a few things to highlight on the report. It details the revenue and capital position. As at the end of December, we had a total predicted adverse variance on the whole of the cost of services of £206,000, which is against the budget of 14 million. Some areas are performing favourably against budget, and while others are facing significant pressures due to inflation and other cost demands. But this has been offset overall by higher than budgeted levels of investment income due to us having increased cash balances and higher interest rates than we were anticipating. And that's led to an overall estimated transfer to the general fund at the end of the year of £359,000. As at the end of December, the council had spent 10.162 million on capital schemes in the capital programme, with an expected forecast outturn of 24.7 million. There's various details in the appendices relating to the various revenue over and underspends, plus the capital programme in detail. So I'm happy to take any questions on the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? In the absence immediately, I just got a question. It was on the news, I think, today or yesterday, that they're now talking about the bank base rate very unlikely to drop below 4%, they say now, which means interest rates are likely to stay higher due to turbulence in the market caused by a certain orange gentleman. Do you think... It's not you, you haven't been on holiday. Obviously that'll have an outturn because we've probably been basing our investment income and future outturns on probably a slight decline in the interest rates we get. Is that going to have obviously it's going to have a negative impact on the economy and our residents who are paying more for their mortgages, but do you think that's going to will that have a positive influence on our financial long term or over the next year?
Very possibly, because we've estimated our budgets for interest next year at the information that we had at January, so that we could get the papers ready to be approved at February Council. So if we do see an upturn now in interest rates, that will be reflected next year in possibly an increase in investment income over what we'd budgeted for at the time. Yeah, because at the time our Treasury advisors had advisors that we were going to see a steady decline, and that was the sort of information that we had at the time. But yeah, things have slightly changed now.
Okay, Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on that very note, I mean, bearing in mind the macroeconomic conditions do change, and things used to take anywhere between 2 to 7 years for a cycle, and now happens to be 2 to 7 months for a cycle. Do we not take periodic updates, reviews of the assumptions that we've made, just to ensure that we don't go too far off the mark, bearing in mind, expected versus actual?
We update our interest estimate monthly. So in terms of the information that we've got, so our actual estimate for what our outturn is going to be is updated every month, because that's our key variable really at the moment, the amount of interest income that we receive. So unfortunately we can't change the figure that we've budgeted for, but we can certainly we refresh the estimates every month so that we've got a month-on-month feeling for what we think we're going to achieve at year end.
Can I also ask, obviously you talked about slight variance in terms of being a slightly negative outturn in terms of how much we're getting in. Just is that within the margin of typical error? Because I know these things sort of trails below and then suddenly it comes back. Are we happily within our normal margin?
yeah, the way we've got that tracked, we're sort of not seeing any huge swings either upwards or downwards. It is kind of tracking as we would expect. Yeah, yeah.
Has anybody else got anything else they'd like to ask? No, I think we'll then just move to the recommendation to endorse the revenue, I don't know why I said revenue and capital position for quarter 3, variance details in Appendix 1. All those in favour of the recommendations?
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund with Deborah leading on this. And guests and the team.
Good evening, thank you, Chair. So the report in front of you outlines the proposals for next year's allocation of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This allocation was first given to Broadland District Council 3 years ago. It was a programme for 3 years, and it was anticipated that the programme would finish this coming 31st of March. Just before Christmas, it was announced that that funding would be extended for a further year, albeit at a significantly reduced rate. The funding that we've got covers both supporting businesses, communities and people, which is why Kerry is here as well, because it crosses the entire council of our support. The proposals outlined in front of you are to extend certain programmes that we've got running at the moment and build on other programmes that we have developed over the last 3 years. First of all, with regard to supporting businesses, we've been providing grants through the Business Builder programme at a variety of different levels, smaller grants for start-up businesses, all the way through to larger capital grants for sizable pieces of equipment to encourage growth and enable the creation of high-skilled jobs within the businesses. In addition to that, we've been supporting people. We've had grants through businesses which are to take on additional apprentices. And then we've been supporting individuals who are further from the job market to engage in employment support. Over the last 3 years, we've had a Pride in Place programme. And the proposals for next year build on that with specific support. So at that point, I will be handing over to Kerry to outline those proposals.
Hello everyone. So there's a couple of parts that the funding will support some of the work we already do in the Help Hub around employability support. I think you just mentioned that. But building on what we're already doing to keep people in the workplace or getting them back into it. And then lots of work around youth provision. So youth provision is something which the previous iteration of funding has really started to bolster, looking at certain areas and what we might like to do around town and parish councils to build local youth groups and that sort of thing, and this will continue that work. In addition, what we're actually looking to spend this particular cash on is some work around finding out where those young people are that are having problems earlier rather than leaving it to become a crisis. So everything I bleat on about all the time in the Help Hub, which is getting to people sooner. So, why is somebody absent from school, whether that be once or twice or 3 times, and what might we be able to do to support that person to remain back into school, and also what support is there in their community. So we will have, we'll be looking to spend that money on a person in our triage and assessment team, who will make those calls to families and find out what's going on, looking at doing that across both primary and secondary school, because I hypothesise, and we'll see whether I'm proven right or wrong, that there'll be quite significantly different issues that are preventing a person from getting into school or engaging in their usual activity in those 2 age groups. We'll then support that with some work around building that community capacity a little bit more, thinking about where we can set up groups that are of interest to young people, what might they like to do in their local communities, reutilising some of our money in a slightly different way, some of the grant funding we put in a particular focus around young people, and then finally doing some work in some specific areas. And in Broadland we're looking towards Rackheath, where there's huge amounts of development, and what can we do to help support young people to have youth provision and support in their local community. This bit feeds into a larger piece of work that we're looking at to just consider how we support young people overall throughout a multitude of services throughout the council and what we're up to. I
I hope that helps.
There is just one part on that. In the youth engagement, in section 4.6, there is an error in the paper. It says it's proposed that £60,000 is used for this. It should read £70,000 because that's how much we worked out it would cost for this, and unfortunately my maths didn't quite work out.
I'm happy with that.
I'm happy to answer any questions. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sure someone's got something they'd like to ask. Jonathan.
Yeah, just two quick questions. The funding that we're now going to get is 429,000. Is that just for 1 year? Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, because obviously it was 1.3 million for the. So it's not that much down then, because I thought it was obviously 1.3 million for 3 years, and this is for 1 year. Are we likely to see it again? Do you think? Has that been a sort of successful thing where they might do some more funding, or?
So yes, if you split the 1.3 directly across the 3 years, it isn't a massive change, but the funding wasn't allocated in that way. It was a small percentage in the first year, a medium percentage in the second year, and this most recent last year that we're just coming to a wrap on was about 800,000. So it is considerably smaller in terms of the provision for next year. The people and skills side of thing we were only allowed to do in the third year, so that's why the funding ramped up in the third year. This funding was originally brought in as the end of European funding. So it replaced the European Social Fund and the European Regional Development Fund. And it was seen to be something in the middle before they made a decision. It has been extended for 1 more year. They have confirmed this is the end of this. So lots of what we're trying to do is to anticipate what might come later to make sure that there is a legacy to the funding that we have got. Thank you.
Just another question for Kerry. The work on obviously the youth work, how does that, because didn't County Council used to have truant officers and everything like that, and then that is obviously all declined. You don't see them anymore. Because I used to work in retail, and it used to make me, it used to interest me every day that I'd be in the shops and I'd see what I would class as quite a few sort of high percentage of children. Obviously, some would be off on appointments, the doctors, the dentists, or off poorly or whatever, and they had to be. It just seemed to me that there wasn't anybody doing that work. So for me, it is quite interesting that as a district, we are saying, yeah, the work's not being done, and it would be, if we have got a higher percentage of our children doing it, it is a good thing. But yeah, would this link in with anything county are doing, or are county not doing it, so we're having to do it?
It's certainly not the case that they're not doing it. There's enough business for us all. This is more about providing additional support. So, for example, in the building, we have the schools and communities team that work here. They've only got criteria to work with kids who are with special educational needs or disabilities. They don't have the funding to work with families that don't experience those issues. So what we'd be looking to do is contact those that don't meet their criteria and just look at what we can do. So often, this is about getting people to the right service. So often people will be off, they might be unwell. If you're off unwell 3 times in the course of a term, is it because your house is damp? Is it because you've got no money to pay for your uniform? And that's all stuff that we can help with. So it's about identifying where those people are. Now, where there are issues that aren't within our jurisdiction to support, we will absolutely help to get them to the right place, which again is our bread and butter in the hub anyway. So this is about a different face, but also for us, it's about identifying and gathering some of that data about what do kids need, what do they need to be supported, and then there's some more stuff that we can put in. So it works alongside it. We've been doing all of this work with a chap called Paul Webb from Children's Services. Don't ask me what his job title is, but he's very good at this stuff, and he knows all about the sort of gaps in provision that we're trying to reach. And it's proven to be a really good partnership. So I'm pleased to say it's strengthening our relationship with Children's Services to support children in a better way.
Okay, we've got Caroline next, then Lacey.
I just wanted to say I support anything that encourages youth engagement and everything. With the apprentices, you said ensure a target of 40 apprentices commencing employment. Is that through with just the council, or is that through other businesses as well? And the other thing is, how are you actually supporting residents in job searching physically? How are you supporting them? Can you give an example?
I'll start with the apprenticeship side of things. So that the funding that we've got is for non-levy paying businesses, so small to medium businesses across the district, for them to be able to take on an apprentice. So it will be for 40 new apprentices in potentially businesses that have never taken on an apprentice before. So it's working in partnership with Apprenticeships Norfolk, who specialise in this, and they are the ones that connect up the training providers with the employers, with the individuals, to make sure that the right people are in there and they're retained, and the businesses can keep them for the entire duration of the apprenticeship.
And not wanting to use too much of a jargony word, barriers is a massive issue with employment. What are people's barriers that stop them from going out to work? And a bit like the thing with kids, there are unknown reasons why. So can they get there? Can they travel there? Have they got a mental health concern that hasn't been dealt with? Do they need extra support to work with an employer who might not realise that they're a carer and that has got an issue? So a whole host of super practical things will help a person get into the employment market. We're not in the business of just dealing with someone who's just lost their job, but they're perfectly adequate to go and get another one. They know what they're doing. There are other services for that. This is about people who are a little bit removed from that ability to apply for jobs right now, and what can we do to support them to get there is our main job.
A friend of mine actually took a CV course at Carrabrick. Is that still going ahead? Is it still? Because that was really beneficial, and that's super. Thank you.
Lacey.
Thank you. School and community teams. What's the push through for those families who that's their front door and they've got special needs, but the children who might have uniform problems, damp in the home, how are they accessing school and community teams to get the push through to come to you? Thank you.
So we live in hope that schools are identifying those people and pushing them to us, but schools are individual institutions in their own right, and each one is incredibly different to the next. So we work really hard to get in with them, but it's not always the easiest thing. This is one way that we might be able to access those schools and start to do something really productive with them. So yeah, it's honestly on a case by case. Where schools are really aware of the schools and communities team, because that's a challenge even for children's services to make sure that they're really embedded, then of course they'll send us the people. And the guys that are in that team are based here for that reason. You know, somebody's got SEND needs, there's loads of other stuff that sits around that, so they can provide that support in terms of that subject matter, but what else do they need? So they come through all different routes. You know, we try really hard just to tell people on the whole that we're there to support them. But yeah, we hope that this will increase that throughput from schools and from other organisations that work with young people.
I'll go to Shane, Tony, then James along the line.
Thank you, Chair. Just a follow-up question on the people accessing work. How are you finding those people? Is it like an incidental find, or do you have any links with the DWP?
We will get people from all over the place. Wherever they come from, we will take them. So yeah, there are links through our benefits team, through people that come through the front door themselves, that might come through our partnerships with the DWP, all sorts. There is, as always with us, there is no criteria. If you meet the need that you need a job from us, if that's not the team to help you, we'll find you the right one that does. So as always, on an individual basis, if you say you need help finding employment, it might not be this team, it might be a different one, but we'll get you there.
Yeah, I was just thinking that there's the central government push to encourage more people into work might actually increase that level, and maybe more people from the DWP will be identified through it.
What I should mention is that this links in really heavily with lots of work that's going on locally, nationally, around getting people into work. So things like Get Britain Working, which is coming down, other stuff that county are doing, this all ties in with all of that. So this isn't us in isolation working to get people back into employment. It's part of a much bigger picture to do that.
Tony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just ask a question on the Business Builder programme? It's nice to see that we can back startups and businesses in the area. It's really quite commendable. I think that's the backbone of any healthy economy, is a good starting point. And I've seen plenty of advertising about it as well, especially on LinkedIn, which is where most people tend to. How realistic are the targets that you have set for yourselves for the year to come versus what's been achieved?
Stretching but deliverable. We know the demand is out there for funding. The funding will look slightly different to previous years because we've got a smaller pot to play with, but we're confident through the networks we have, the connections with businesses, the networking events and such like, that we will have more than enough custom to support businesses through whatever they're looking to achieve. So realistic but achievable.
James.
Thank you. I'm always really nervous about these, but I'm working it right. Firstly, on the youth thing, I'm really encouraged to hear that. I mean, I speak to some of my younger friends and they are disaffected and quite depressed about the future, so it's really good to hear. And I hope it includes things like supporting kids that aren't eating enough, going to school without breakfast and sitting there with an empty packed lunchbox because they're too embarrassed to say anything, which is, when you hear those stories, it's just heartbreaking. But it's my question isn't about that. It's about 4.7, so the and net zero ambitions. So is there any budget and support we can give to local businesses? We've got the target of net zero by 2030, which is great as a council. But unless we bring the whole of Broadland with us, will it make that much difference? So can we give support to businesses with that, reducing their emissions, and is there any budget to help them with that as well, is my question. Thanks.
So we're not being particularly prescriptive with the business grants and what they should be used for. There are some general categories and we make some suggestions about how that money might be spent. We do actively encourage that they're used for initiatives for either environmental benefit or efficiency measures and other things. So there is funding available, but it would be down to the business to choose how they apply for and implement that funding.
Can I just ask, with regard to resilience of these projects going forward, I mean, obviously we've got almost like a one-off grant again, and that money could, in theory, then dry up next year. We've also got the local government review, which means any new council coming in may be very tempted just to say, we will deliver only core services, we will clean the decks of all the things that other councils, legacy projects and things, because that maybe they just want to start from ground zero because of government funding cuts. So we've got a lot of things that could be coming forward. How are we ensuring that this money, I just wondered about a couple of examples about the legacy element, about how you're ensuring that there's going to be something that this isn't sort of mud thrown at a wall and then sliding off. Do you know what I mean? Because these are great projects. I don't think anyone can criticise any of the ambition within them, and you want to see these things continue, but we just want to see some sort of flesh on the bones about how you think this is going to stick.
I think the only thing we're certain about is that it's uncertain, but we're not sure. I'll pass over to Kerry to talk about how we might.
Just on the youth stuff, just to give you some examples, we have been thinking about this. We're in discussion with other people about putting some money into this too, so it wouldn't be just this money that would be going into that youth provision, but I can't guarantee anything because we've not had them yet. But just to work through each of them in turn, the sort of triage and assessment function, that could well be short term, but this is about learning what's going on for young people as much as it is sometimes doing the stuff. So hopefully what we'll glean from that is at least stuff we can do in the future. The whole purpose of this community capacity building thing is the legacy. So can we get the community to set up groups, set up volunteer bases to really start delivering some stuff that's helpful for young people? So I'd like to see the legacy there. And then the work that we're doing with town and parishes to help them to understand youth groups and what it means to commission youth work, we hope will go into the future. So we know from the previous Pride and Praise funding, Sprowston, Long Stratton in South Norfolk are two examples locally where actually the town and parish council have been really keen to carry it on. So that initial funding has led to funding in perpetuity. So we already know that we're looking at this kind of model with all of this stuff to ensure that it continues. It's particularly with young people. All children's services tell me is you can't do this short term, it's got to be long term. So they're equally banging the same drum because it's right for the people that we're working with.
Thanks. Peter.
The main thrust of this report, if I'm reading it correctly, is about inputs. What I'm struggling with is where are all the outputs? How will I know how many people have been helped? How will I know how many businesses have been helped? How will I know what help that actually achieved in terms of outcomes? Was it just money in the door? Was there some positive result out of the door? So where would I find all this?
So as part of the funding, we have to report back to the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government at the end of 6 months and at the end of the year. There are set outputs and outcomes that we have to agree to, and we will then be tested against those. So as part of this, we do have to put together an evaluation and evidence of what we have achieved with the funding, and that will obviously be a published document at the end of the funding. Yes, it will be.
There'll be some obvious measurables with the work around employability in young people. Are the people we've seen in work now? That's a nice easy one. Do they stay in there? Is slightly longer term, and how will that work? Are more people going to school more regularly? Will be an easy one to measure. We could look at reductions in antisocial behaviour, reductions in other bits and pieces that we might be able to attribute to this. But of course, they're all subjective. Something else might have impacted that. The honest answer is that some of this stuff is really long term. So the work we do with young people now might not pay dividends until later, and it might be quite hard to attribute it to it. But what we do know is that investing in people around that kind of prevention agenda, getting them moving, getting them engaging with people, is better for people's long-term health. And I like to look really far into the future with what we're doing with people. Is this going to stop them needing to be a burden on the NHS service or our prison services or our police services? They're all things that we do. We have to make some educated guesses around that. So with this project, there will be some really tangible things straight away and some stuff that says our gut says this is right and we need to invest in it for the future. But not so easy to measure, which does stress me out.
Caroline.
Sorry, last question. The funding for youth provision, is that available to existing parishes who have youth provision who are struggling to pay for it?
We don't have much money to go around. Sorry, we don't have loads of money to go around. So the way we're splitting it is in 3 parts. It will be the triage and assessment type function. It will be at the other end, the Rackheath bit around that new community. And the other bit will be about where can we leverage in cash to bring into to existing town and parishes and existing areas where there's stuff going on. The short answer is no. The long answer is we would hope that it would help us to bring extra cash in that would support them.
I spotted a parish council chairman thinking yes. Well, no, that's that. If you don't ask, you don't get. Thank you. We'll move on to the recommendations. There's lots of recommendations there. I'm not going to read them out. We can all read them. But all those in favour of the recommendations are stated on the papers.
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you so much for answering the questions and for the great work you're doing. As working in education myself, I'm sure we will all be pleased with those benefits. I think it would be nice if the area in which I work, which is just outside of Broadland, did quite as much as well as that you are doing. Because many of the things that you are talking about there are things that our school has taken on doing, but you know, which we don't get any support from our city council on. Thank you. Next item is the Norfolk Economic Strategy. Oh, we have the same team. So thank you, Deborah.
Yes, that's me again. So Norfolk County Council were required to develop and adopt an economic strategy for Norfolk when the local enterprise partnership integrated into Norfolk County Council. They went through quite a long process of development. It involved stakeholders across all of the district, businesses, parish and town councils. They held 2 workshops here for thoughts and opinions of Broadland stakeholders to be integrated into it. And the document in front of you is the document that Norfolk County Council adopted in December. What you're being requested to do is to receive and note the report itself. We're not requesting an adoption because it's not our strategy to adopt. What I would say is it links in very closely with the Economic Growth Strategic Plan that was adopted here back in 2022. It has a number of the same key sectors and the same key clusters for us to work with and to support over the next few years. The paper does outline some of the changes that could come around as part of the local government reorganisation, and obviously at that point this would be a different document then. But for the time being, this is the strategy for Norfolk. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask? Jonathan.
Yeah, just this is obviously not our report, so we don't really change anything in it and everything like that. But yeah, I was just looking at page 104 and page 105. That's our pages, not their page numbers. We did have a chance to mention the Broadland Food Innovation Centre, because obviously they mentioned the Food Enterprise Park and the Research Park, and I do feel that the Research Park just sort of gets mentioned every single time anybody talks about anything like that. And I just think, you know, they could have done us a favour and put the Broadland Food Innovation Centre in there, just in that line. That wouldn't have made much difference. And the other point, just on page 110, 111, I see those percentages there. SMEs in Norfolk. It says 99.7%. Do they mean that 99% of the businesses in Norfolk are small and medium? Yeah? All right. And that would make sense then. But I was just looking at that and seeing that was what that meant. Right, lovely. Thank you.
The appendix today is just the summary version. In the full document, it does mention the Broadland Food Innovation Centre. And when the draft did come to us, that was one of the things that we fed back. It didn't have enough Broadland businesses, enough about our market towns and our businesses. So some of that has been incorporated, but that is a sizable document, and so it's just the summary we've attached.
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, just what jumped out at me under the issues and risks, and I would say this isn't a risk, this is a marvellous bonus that to have this economic strategy, it enables the conditions for local enterprise partnership integration. I thought local enterprise partnerships were anti-democratic aberration when they were brought in. Loads of people coming in saying we're spending lots of money without any of them being elected, and lots of them being appointed because they were friends with people. So I'm very pleased to see them abolished and coming back under some form of democratic control. So that's a great issue as far as I'm concerned, but that's my own personal view. I think we'll go straight. Well, we literally have to just. Our recommend is to just receive a note Norfolk County Council's economic strategy, also known as the Norfolk Local Growth Plan. So we don't have to have a vote on this. We'll just receive it. Duly noted. Duly noted. Thank you. We'll all note and nod to you that we've noted it. Thank you. Let's go to the Local Authority Housing Fund, round 3. We have a new team here, Lindsay, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is indeed round 3B actually. What we have is we've got a paper here which is looking to seek agreement to accept an allocation that we've received for further funding for Local Authority Housing Fund round 3. We were notified of this around Christmas time and we put in a request. We have been allocated a total of £638,400 to provide 3 additional temporary accommodation properties and 1 resettlement property. Just as the paper notes, we've successfully delivered on previous rounds of LAF, and therefore because of this we have an established and experienced team ready to go to deliver the work. The paper has been brought forward in this way today because there was a time pressure from MHCLG to actually accept the funding, but as it states in there, this is with the expectation that we will bring a further paper with a fully formed business case of how this money will be utilised and the possibility of further TA purchases, but that paper wasn't quite ready yet, but we didn't want to miss the date for the agreement of accepting the LAF funding as it is here. So, but just to note as well that should that not occur with the future paper, should that not be agreed, if we accept this and it is decided not to purchase any, we can always return it. So.
Thank you. I think we all understood from the previous debates around these housing purchases that speed is of the essence, and making sure the fund's there and everything is ready to go is obviously vitally important, because if not you lose the properties. Has anybody got anything they'd like to ask? I think everyone sort of pretty much understands the what goes on, because we've gone through this process several times now. So we'll move to the recommendations, which appear to be as they're stated there, with all the funding outlined. All those in favour of the recommendations?
And that's carried, Chairman.
Thank you. Again, thank you for the work you're doing on that. As I've mentioned before, opportunities that one of the reasons for local government review is or reorganisation is apparently district councils' failures to deal with housing issues such as this, and we're ahead of the game, but we're still being punished and thrown in with everyone else who's failed to do it. So continuing your great work, thank you for everything you've done on this. We'll move then, therefore, on to item 12, which is the Climate Change, Environment and Biodiversity Delivery Plan for 2025 to 2028. With Annie.
Lindsay. Is that your water?
Good evening, everyone. So this report presents a revised version of the previous Environmental Strategy and Delivery Plan, which is now titled the Climate Change, Environment and Biodiversity Delivery Plan. And just to highlight that alongside the delivery plan, the Council publishes annual carbon footprints on its website, which provides a detailed breakdown of Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. So returning to the updated delivery plan, it's being developed to better reflect the Council's commitments to achieving its net zero targets, but also to addressing its declaration of a climate emergency and a biodiversity emergency. So the plan places a greater emphasis on biodiversity, on waste reduction and pollution and air quality. So the original delivery plan spanned 3 years, and it outlined Broadland District Council's commitment to advancing its environmental agenda, and it also set that that net zero emission target of 2030. The new plan is also designed around a 3-year framework, and it's due for review. So some of the actions in the updated delivery plan are from previous years, but many of those targets in there are new, and they reflect the duties that stem from the Environment Act and the need that we have as a council to respond to that. So while some of the duties under that Act, such as addressing pollution, air quality and waste reduction, were included in the original plan, this updated version places a much greater emphasis on biodiversity in particular. So the delivery plan details how it will meet legal requirements in line with the government's commitments to halt species decline by 2030 and advance nature recovery. And these objectives are covered in BNG 1 to BNG 10 within the plan. So in terms of biodiversity reporting, the following targets are set within the Environment Act. So by the 1st of January 2026, local authorities must publish their first biodiversity report. And then every 5 years thereafter, reports must be updated, and these reports must carry out or must provide details on the actions that are taken to conserve and enhance biodiversity. These targets are effectively there in place to ensure that local authorities are contributing towards those government targets, which, as I've said already, are around halting species decline by 2030, but also by around increasing species abundance by 2042. So the delivery plan, particularly core aspect 5, which is biodiversity, nature recovery and green infrastructure, they serve really as the Council's first statement in outlining its commitments under the Environment Act, and it establishes clear targets and goals to ensure that the Council is compliant with its biodiversity duties. So following the Environmental Excellent Policy Development Panel advice on January the 9th, 2025, additional details have been added at the start of that document to provide details on the Council's Scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions, but also on Broadland as a district's territorial emissions. More focused details were also added regarding that how is it measured column to ensure that targets are easy to track and to measure. The panel supported the actions outlined in the plan and endorsed the projects for 2025 to 2028 without any changes to those specific plans themselves. So I think I'll pause there and then take any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Shane indicates straight away.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just draw your attention to page 135 and the graph for greenhouse gas emissions, and comparing that to page 137, the carbon footprint. On page 135, the graph only goes up to 2022. Is that the most up-to-date graph?
I believe so. So they're the emissions for Broadland as a district overall. So we use data that's published by government. So I believe they would be the most up-to-date figures that we currently have.
Anybody else? I'll go with Mark, then Jonathan.
For the protecting, restoring, enhancing natural habitats and green spaces, have you actually got some spaces that have been identified, or are you going to go out looking for further spaces to restore?
So the plan would be that as a council, when we're looking at our biodiversity baseline, we would be identifying a biodiversity baseline on council-owned sites. So very much the Environment Act has an emphasis, or places an emphasis, on local authorities delivering enhancement on their own lands as a matter of priority. So what we would do is identify probably top 10 or top 20 sites. We would then carry out a biodiversity baseline on those sites themselves, and then we would look to carry out enhancements on those sites and report against those. We would probably look at doing something it's got to be realistic and achievable. So selecting, I think we've suggested in here 3 sites a year specifically that we would do a deeper dive on to enhance. But that biodiversity baseline survey would effectively set a work plan for how we look to enhance biodiversity across council-owned land.
So it's estate specific, basically.
That is correct. That's the emphasis that's coming from government. Albeit I would say, obviously, the council is doing work then is more broadly speaking around nature recovery through things like the local nature recovery strategy, and looking at how we work with partner organisations to try and improve nature recovery. But the first point of call would be looking at how we do that as an organisation on our own land, but supporting other organisations to improve biodiversity across the district where there is opportunities as outlined through the local nature recovery strategies.
Jonathan.
Yeah, I think for me it's a little bit of a concern that again the central government view is it's not take action, it's do a report on what you're going to do. Now, that is basically what they're saying. You know, they're not setting a target, they're saying make sure you've got a report to achieve something. And obviously we are well ahead in Broadland, but we obviously have done a lot of the heavy lifting already with the move to the Horizon building and the waste contract. Obviously I don't know how it's going to go, obviously, if we have, you know, if there is a unitary council, for instance, how that would then be, you know, obviously all of the hard work we've done is going to be countered by the fact that we'll be merged with a lot of other councils which haven't done anything, for instance. You know, we could look at, say, somewhere like Norwich, which has got obviously a really old building and not as good a waste contract. So that would, I just wonder how we're going to measure ourselves, if you know what I mean. I can see that, you know, it's a good report. It's got lots of information in it, but we've done quite a lot of the heavy lifting, and I don't know how we then measure ourselves going forward with it.
I'm not going to comment specifically on how we measure ourselves in the context of local government reorganisation. But what I'd say is that what we've tried to do with this document and the previous strategy is to look at what do we do as a council first. So how can we influence our own estates and operations to reduce our emissions? And you're right, we have Broadland District Council have got the lowest emissions of any district council in Norfolk. So a lot of the heavy lifting has been done here in that regard. But what I would say is that really the majority of the rest of this document effectively is about how do we influence that change beyond what we're doing as a local authority, because our emissions, and I think the comment was made earlier on tonight that actually as an organisation our emissions are relatively low. So how do we support that bigger change? And I suppose in terms of biodiversity, in terms of pollutants, in terms of CO2 emissions, those things reduce regardless of government boundaries. I suppose our role in that is to influence as much of that change as possible, so that whatever future organisations we are in or we have are set up to deliver climate change mitigation, adaptation and biodiversity enhancement.
I think one of the things which we always used to say, and obviously I was one of the people who was really keen to move to this building, and we did have a collection of councillors who couldn't see there was any point and everything like that. But for me, that was always, we were going to be asking businesses in our district to pull their finger out and do things. And obviously that would be only good for us if we could say to them, we've done things, can you do things? You know, it's very difficult to say to businesses, can you do something, if we're then saying, well, you haven't done anything. So I think we do need to lead by example. And I think that's what, you know, all the work you're doing is leading on that. And that is very positive to see it. So that's very good. But yeah, I think we don't know how things are going to go. And it will be more tricky, but hopefully we'll be able to at least set a good example and lead from that as well, obviously with other councils as well. But thank you.
I'm going to go with Emma, then Caroline.
I think Caroline had her hand up first, but I'll cue jump her. It's all good. I don't mind. I've got the things as chairman. So there you go. Mine's not a question, it's more of a comment, because I was on the Environmental Excellence panel when this came through, and it was quite a fractious meeting, for want of a better word. But one of the things that we did say was that actually, as a district council, and echoing what Councillor Empsall just said, actually we're quite ahead compared to some of the others. And one of the things we really wanted to see was where it was possible to have a measurable, let's use it to celebrate that success. And actually I just wanted to say that I can see that some of that's been put in, and I'm really pleased to see it, because actually kind of where we may end up going, it could well be that actually we need to be sharing our strengths, and where we are ahead of the others, something like this could hopefully be taken and that good practice could be spread across. So it was more a thank you for that meeting, and also just for some of the actions that have taken as a result of that. So thank you.
I presume this report doesn't just cover the building or waste collection. I read in the paper there's like 10 acres of wetland being handed over in Rackheath. Is that part of this project?
I don't know specifically about the 10 acres of wetland in Rackheath, but what I would say is that any land that comes over to the council that we adopt that's as a result of any new development would then be under the same principles as this document. So I can't comment specifically on that piece of land, but any new land that we adopt and that we take on would then, the presumption would be that we apply these principles to those areas.
Been approved by planning, so it's going ahead. So maybe it's something you would like me to.
Great.
James.
Yeah, I'm trying to help with your bingo. Just wanted to say, well, one, thank you for this. I think it's a great report. It's great to have measures in there as well to track our progress towards 2030. I think that lacks in a lot of central government plans who think that what they think it's going to happen at 2050, not track the progress through to it. So that's really good. But just like water quality is like in the news all the time at the moment. And I've been to a few public meetings with Anglia Water, who seem to be in denial about their culpability a lot of the time, whilst making a fortune for their shareholders. So how do we work with Anglia Water on? I'm ignorant on it. So is there a sort of summary? How do we work with Anglia Water to improve things like water quality in Broadland?
So there'll be work that's being undertaken around water quality that's carried out by the regulatory services team. Nick Howard and his team will be doing work as kind of part of council statutory duty around water quality, pollution. I would say that in terms of conversations with Anglian Water, there's quite an open dialogue between them and particularly the planning team around water and water quality, and obviously that has a link to some of the issues that we've been grappling with around nutrient neutrality as well. So I'd say that as a council, we've got some members of staff, particularly in the directorate team, with Phil Courtier, who've really taken leadership for Norfolk on those conversations. But there is a ongoing and strong dialogue with Anglian Water, but also with the Environment Agency. I don't know, George, if you...
Yeah, I wouldn't add much to that. We have a role and responsibility to promote best use of water resources around us and to encourage good corporate behaviour. We have great relationships and networks with a wide variety of private and public sector bodies. That will continue, but we can only act in the capacity that we have.
Thank you very much. I think we'll move to the recommendations, looking around here. The recommendation to recommend to the Council the adoption of the Climate Change, Environment and Biodiversity Delivery Plan 25-28 as attached on Appendix 1. All those in favour?
And it's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for your answering of our questions. I see you're coming up later on, but I will move to the exclusion of the press and public. I move that the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business, because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972, as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order of